The Christmas lights in Director Murphy's office blinked in that slow, mechanical rhythm that made everything feel more depressing than festive. 20 years. I'd spent 20 Christmases in this building, and this was my last one. I turned 19 2 weeks ago, which meant Oakwood Home for Children was officially done with me. The timing felt particularly cruel, being pushed out right before the holidays when everyone else was gathering with family. Director Murphy cleared his throat and slid a padded envelope across his desk. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed, competing with the faint sound of younger kids singing carols in the common room downstairs. "Lucas," he said, his voice carrying that practiced sympathy I'd heard 1,000 times, "these are your documents. Birth certificate, medical records, and one personal item that came with you when you arrived. I'd been left at a hospital when I was 2 days old. No note, no explanation, just a baby boy wrapped in a blue knit blanket and a silver bracelet with my name engraved on it. Lucas. That was all anyone knew. Someone had cared enough to name me, but not enough to keep me. I opened the envelope slowly, finding the expected paperwork inside. School transcripts that showed I was decent at math but terrible at staying out of trouble. Vaccination records. A psychological evaluation from when I was 12 that used words like attachment issues and difficulty trusting authority. All the highlights of growing up in the system. Then, at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, I found something I'd never seen before. It was a small leather pouch, worn smooth with age. Inside was a tarnished silver key and a folded piece of paper that looked like it might disintegrate if I breathed on it too hard. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the key. Director Murphy adjusted his glasses, squinting at it. "That came with your intake paperwork 19 years ago. According to our records, it was in the blanket you were wrapped in. We're required to hold personal effects until a child ages out. I'll be honest, Lucas, I forgot it was even in your file until I was preparing your exit documents." My hand shook slightly as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, written by someone whose hand wasn't steady anymore, or maybe by someone who was crying while they wrote. "For Lucas, when he's old enough. The farm is yours. Find Meadowbrook Acres, Route 47, Willow Creek. The key opens what matters. Forgive me, I'm sorry I couldn't be there, J. Just the initial J. No last name, no explanation, no context." I stared at those words until they blurred together. Someone had left me a farm. Someone who couldn't keep me but wanted me to have something. "Do you know anything about this?" I asked, my throat tight. "Meadowbrook Acres? Willow Creek?" Director Murphy shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, son. There's nothing else in your file. Whoever left you here didn't provide any additional information. The state tried to track down your biological family when you were younger, but they hit dead ends. This is the first I'm hearing about any farm." I turned the key over in my palm. It was real, solid, proof that somewhere out there someone had thought about me beyond the moment they'd left me at that hospital. The initial J, a farm I'd never heard of, a place called Willow Creek that might not even exist anymore. That night, I packed my entire life into a backpack and a duffel bag. 3 pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, the blue blanket I'd been found in, my documents, and the mysterious key. I also took a snow globe that one of the social workers had given me when I was 8. It had a tiny farmhouse inside, and I used to shake it and imagine living somewhere that quiet, somewhere that belonged to me. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Most of the other kids had already left for holiday placements with foster families or relatives. The building felt emptier than usual, echoing with the ghosts of all the children who'd passed through over the decades. I said goodbye to Ms. Chen, the night supervisor who'd always been kind to me, and walked out into the December cold just as snow started to fall. I had $83 in my pocket, a key to a place I'd never heard of, and absolutely no plan beyond finding out what Meadowbrook Acres was. It sounded insane, chasing after something that might not even exist anymore, but it was the only thread connecting me to whoever I came from. And on Christmas Eve, with nowhere else to go, that thread felt like everything. I walked 6 blocks through the snow to an internet cafe that stayed open 24 hours. The guy behind the counter barely looked up when I came in, just gestured toward the computers in the back. I bought an hour of time with some of my precious cash and started searching. Willow Creek. I added the state, then expanded to neighboring states. At first, nothing came up. Then I refined the search to include Meadowbrook Acres and finally found something. A tiny mention in a county property records database from a place about 90 miles west, in a rural area I'd never heard of. The listing said the property had been seized for unpaid taxes 3 years ago and was currently bank-owned. My stomach dropped. Bank-owned meant foreclosed, bankrupt. Whatever someone had left me was gone, swallowed up by debts and legal processes. But the address was there. Route 47, Willow Creek. The place existed, even if it was no longer mine to claim. I zoomed in on the map, tracing the route with my finger. 90 miles might as well have been 1,000, given that I had no car and barely enough money for food. But I also had nothing else. No family, no home, no plan. Just a key, a cryptic note, and the stubborn belief that I had to see this place for myself. I left the internet cafe with a screenshot of the map saved on my phone and started walking toward the bus station. The snow was coming down heavier now, coating the sidewalks and making everything look clean and peaceful, which felt wrong given the chaos in my head. Christmas music drifted from Dian fronts, all those songs about home and family and belonging that had always felt like they were mocking me. The Greyhound station was nearly empty, just a few travelers huddled on plastic chairs waiting for delayed buses. The woman behind the ticket counter looked exhausted, her Santa hat sitting crooked on her head. I approached and asked about routes to Willow Creek. She typed on her computer, frowning. Willow Creek? That's pretty rural. I can get you to Hartfield, which is about 15 miles away. Bus leaves in 40 minutes, $62. I handed over most of my remaining cash and took the ticket. $62 for a one-way trip to the middle of nowhere on Christmas Eve. If this turned out to be nothing, I'd be stranded with $21 and no way back. But something in my gut told me I had to go. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the first real curiosity I'd felt about my own origins in years. The bus was half empty, filled mostly with people who looked as displaced as I felt. I chose a seat near the back and pressed my face against the cold window, watching the city lights give way to suburbs, then to darkness broken only by occasional farmhouses decorated with Christmas lights. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. Snow-covered fields stretched endlessly, broken by bare trees that looked like skeletons against the night sky. I pulled out the note and read it again for the 100th time. The farm is yours. Find Meadowbrook Acres. The key opens what matters. Forgive me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. Jay. Who was Jay? A parent. A grandparent. Someone who'd cared but couldn't keep me for reasons I'd never understand. The apology felt heavy, weighted with regret that had traveled 19 years to reach me. The bus rolled through the night, stopping occasionally in small towns that looked like they belonged in another era. Finally, around 2 in the morning, we pulled into Hartfield. The driver announced it was the last stop before the route turned south, and I grabbed my bags and stepped out into the frigid air. Hartfield was barely a town. A gas station, a closed diner, and a few buildings that might have been shops or houses. It was hard to tell in the dark. The bus pulled away, leaving me standing in the snow under a single streetlight. I walked toward the gas station, which thankfully was open. The clerk inside was an older man with a grey beard, reading a paperback novel. He looked up when the door chimed. "Merry Christmas," he said, though it was technically Christmas morning now. "Yeah, you too," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Hey, do you know how to get to Willow Creek from here?" He set down his book, studying me with curious eyes. "Willow Creek's about 15 miles north on Route 47. You got a car?" I shook my head. I was hoping maybe there's a taxi or something. He laughed, not unkindly. "Son, there's no taxi service out here. This isn't the city. You got somebody you're trying to reach? Maybe I can call them." "No, I'm looking for a place. Meadowbrook Acres. It's a farm." His expression changed immediately, surprise flickering across his weathered face. Meadowbrook? That old place has been abandoned for years. Bank took it over after old Joseph died. Why are you looking for it on Christmas morning? Joseph. The initial J. My heart started pounding. What can you tell me about Joseph? The clerk leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Joseph Brennan owned that farm for probably 50 years. Good man, kept to himself mostly. Had some troubles later in life, I heard. Lost his wife young, then his daughter left town and never came back. Place went downhill after that. He died about 3 years ago, and the bank seized it for back taxes. Property's been sitting empty since. You related to him somehow? I think maybe, I said quietly. I think he might have been my grandfather. The clerk's eyes softened. Well, I'll be damned. Joseph used to talk sometimes about having a grandson he'd never met, but most folks thought he was just lonely, making up stories. You really his kin? I pulled out the note and showed it to him. He read it carefully, then handed it back. That's Joseph's handwriting, he said. I'd recognize it anywhere. He used to leave notes for deliveries. He paused, thinking. Tell you what, my shift ends in an hour. I'll drive you out there. You shouldn't be walking in this weather, and it's Christmas. Nobody should be alone on Christmas. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, really. I can pay you something. He waved a hand. Keep your money. Name's Carl, by the way. I spent the next hour sitting in the gas station, drinking terrible coffee from a machine and trying to process what Carl had told me. Joseph Brennan, my grandfather probably. A man who'd lost everything and ended up alone just like I had. A man who'd left me something even though we'd never met. Carl locked up the station at 3:30, and we climbed into his pickup truck. The roads were treacherous with snow, but Carl drove with the confidence of someone who'd lived here his whole life. We headed north on Route 47, passing through darkness interrupted only by our headlights. What are you hoping to find out there? Carl asked as we drove. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe just answers. Maybe just proof that I came from somewhere. He nodded. That's worth finding. If you're still with me in this story, I'd love to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever gone looking for something from your past? Have you ever taken a leap of faith, not knowing what you'd find? Maybe you've inherited something unexpected, or discovered a family secret that changed everything. Drop your story below, because I read every comment, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's build a community of people who understand what it's like to search for where you belong. We turned off Route 47 onto a narrow road that was barely visible under the snow. Carl's truck bounced over ruts and potholes, the headlights cutting through the darkness to reveal a landscape that felt frozen in time. Bare trees lined the road like sentries, their branches heavy with snow. After about a mile, Carl slowed down and pointed ahead. There it is, he said quietly. In the beam of the headlights, I could make out a weathered wooden sign hanging from a rusted post. The paint was almost completely faded, but I could still read the letters. Meadowbrook Acres. My breath caught in my throat. Carl turned down what must have once been a driveway, but was now barely distinguishable from the surrounding fields. The truck crawled forward through deep snow until a structure emerged from the darkness. A 2-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling and grey in places, shutters hanging at odd angles. Next to it stood a large barn, its roof sagging dangerously in the middle. Everything looked like it was slowly being reclaimed by nature, surrendering to time and neglect. Carl put the truck in park, but left the engine running, the headlights illuminating the scene. "You want me to wait?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I grabbed my flashlight from my bag and stepped out into the knee-deep snow. The cold hit me immediately, but I barely noticed. I was staring at the farmhouse, this place that belonged to my family, this home I'd never known existed. I waded through the snow toward the front porch, each step an effort. The wooden steps groaned under my weight but held. I pulled out the silver key, my hands shaking from more than just the cold, and examined the front door. It had a modern deadbolt, probably installed by the bank, but beneath it was an old original lock, the kind that matched the vintage key in my hand. I inserted the key and turned it. The lock was stiff from years of disuse, but after some pressure, I felt it give. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung inward with a long, mournful creak. The smell hit me first. Musty air, old wood, dampness, and something else. The particular scent of a place that had been lived in and loved and then abandoned. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The beams swept across a living room frozen in time. Furniture sat exactly where it had been left. A couch with faded floral fabric, a recliner with duct tape holding together a split in the leather, a coffee table covered in dust so thick it looked like felt. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper with tiny blue flowers. Picture frames hung everywhere, but I couldn't make them out clearly in the flashlight beam. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The kitchen had avocado green appliances that must have been from the 70s, and a small table with two chairs. 2 chairs. Had Joseph eaten alone all those years, or had he always set a place for someone who never came? I climbed the stairs, testing each step carefully. The second floor had 3 bedrooms. The largest contained a bed with a bare mattress and a dresser with drawers that stuck when I tried to open them. The second bedroom was clearly meant for storage, filled with boxes and old furniture. But it was the third bedroom that made me stop breathing. It was smaller than the others, clearly meant for a child. The walls were painted pale blue, and though the paint was chipped and faded, I could still see what it must have looked like years ago. There was a small bed with a wooden frame, a dresser decorated with hand-painted stars, and shelves filled with books and toys. A mobile hung from the ceiling, wooden airplanes that turned slowly in the draft from the doorway. On the dresser sat a photograph in a silver frame. I picked it up, wiping away the dust. It showed a young woman, maybe 20 years old, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The woman had dark eyes and long brown hair, and she was smiling, but there was sadness in her eyes, a kind of exhaustion that went deeper than just being tired. I knew somehow that this was my mother, and the baby was me. I sank down onto the small bed, clutching the photograph. Joseph had kept this room. He'd maintained it like a shrine, waiting for a grandchild he'd never met, hoping that someday I'd come home. Tears blurred my vision, the first real tears I'd cried in years. I'd spent my whole life believing I'd been thrown away, that I meant nothing to anyone. But Joseph had cared. He'd kept this room ready. He'd left me the farm. He'd tried to leave me something that mattered. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Carl appeared in the doorway, his expression gentle. "You all right, son?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I showed him the photograph. Carl studied it carefully. "That's Joseph's daughter, Rebecca. She left town when she was about 19, 20 maybe. Heard she had a baby, but never came back. Joseph used to talk about her sometimes, always hoping she'd return." He paused. "I guess she couldn't, for whatever reason." "She died," I said quietly, the words coming from some deep certainty I didn't know I had. "She must have died when I was young. That's why I ended up in the system." Carl nodded slowly. "That would make sense. And Joseph, he would have wanted you back. But by then he was probably too old, too sick. The last few years before he died, he was barely managing the farm. He had diabetes real bad, could barely get around." I stood up, carefully setting the photograph back on the dresser. "I need to see the rest of the property. Can you help me look around? In this weather? In the dark?" Carl checked his watch. "It's almost 5 in the morning. Tell you what, why don't you stay here, get some rest? I'll come back after sunrise with some supplies, food, firewood, maybe some tools. We can explore properly in daylight." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with me. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and the emotional weight of everything was crushing. "There's no power," I said. "I've got some camping gear in my truck, sleeping bag, portable heater, flashlights. You'll be all right for a few hours." Carl put a hand on my shoulder. "This place is yours, Lucas. It's been waiting for you. It can wait a few more hours." He was right. I followed him back downstairs and helped him carry in supplies from his truck. He set up a camping heater in the living room, gave me a thick sleeping bag, and left me with extra batteries for my flashlight. "I'll be back around 8, he said from the doorway. "Merry Christmas, kid. I think Joseph would be real glad you're here." After Carl left, I made a nest on the couch with the sleeping bag. But before I tried to sleep, I took my flashlight and went back upstairs to the child's bedroom. I found what I was looking for on one of the shelves, a small wooden box with a simple latch. Inside were more photographs. Me as a baby, as a toddler, school pictures from when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. Someone had been sending Joseph updates about me, probably a social worker, or maybe Rebecca before she died. He'd kept every single one, documenting the grandson he'd never been allowed to meet. At the bottom of the wooden box, beneath all the photographs, I found a letter. The paper was thick, expensive stationery, and the envelope was addressed simply to Lucas. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was the same shaky script from the note that had been left with my key. "Dear Lucas," it began, "if you're reading this, then you found your way home. I'm your grandfather, Joseph Brennan, and I'm writing this because I know I won't be here when you finally arrive. The doctors say I have maybe a year left, and I'm too sick now to fight the bank or the lawyers or anyone else who wants to take this farm. But I need you to know some things before I'm gone. Your mother, Rebecca, was my whole world. After my wife died when Rebecca was just 10, it was just the two of us against everything. I did my best to raise her right, but I was working all the time, trying to keep this farm alive, and I think she felt lonely. When she got pregnant at 19, I reacted badly. I was angry, disappointed, scared for her future. We fought. Terrible things were said on both sides, and she left. I spent 2 years trying to find her, but Rebecca didn't want to be found. Then one day I got a call from a hospital social worker. Rebecca had died from complications of pneumonia. She'd been sick for weeks but hadn't sought treatment until it was too late. She had no insurance, no money, and she'd been living in a shelter with you. The social worker told me about you, that you were 2 years old, healthy, in temporary foster care while they located family. I drove 8 hours to that city, filled out all the paperwork, ready to bring you home. But then they did the background check and the home inspection. I was 72 years old, diabetic, living alone on a failing farm with no steady income. They said I wasn't suitable. They said you deserved better than an old man who could barely take care of himself. Maybe they were right. Maybe you did deserve better. But not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you, wondered where you were, hoped you were safe and loved. I hired a private investigator to check on you every year. That's how I got the photos. I couldn't be in your life, but I could at least know you were alive. The farm is bankrupt, Lucas. I'm sorry. I held on as long as I could, but the last few years have been hard. Medical bills, bad crops, equipment failures, everything that could go wrong did. The bank will take it after I'm gone, and there's nothing I can do about that. But I'm leaving you the key anyway because I want you to come here. I want you to see where you come from, to know that this land was in our family for 3 generations before I lost it. There's something else, though, something I never told anyone. Your great-grandfather, my father, was a suspicious man who didn't trust banks after the Depression. When he died, he told me there was money hidden somewhere on this property. He said it was in a place where the morning sun touches the earth through metal wings. I never figured out what that meant, and honestly, I thought he might have been confused in his final days. But if there's even a chance he was telling the truth, I want you to find it. Maybe it's enough to get the farm back. Maybe it's nothing, but it's yours to search for. I'm sorry I couldn't be the grandfather you deserved. I'm sorry Rebecca and I fought instead of supporting each other. I'm sorry for all the lost years and missed moments, but I'm not sorry you exist. You are the best thing that ever came from our family, and I hope you have a good life wherever you are. The key opens the old workshop behind the barn. That's where I kept all the important documents, family papers, anything I thought you might want to know about where you came from. It's yours now, all of it. Love, your grandfather Joseph. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Joseph had wanted me. He'd tried to get me. He'd thought about me every single day. The farm might be lost, but I wasn't unwanted. I'd never been unwanted. I also couldn't ignore the other part of his letter. Hidden money, somewhere on the property, in a place where the morning sun touches the earth through metal wings. It sounded like a riddle, something from a treasure map. Part of me thought it was probably nothing, the confused ramblings of an old man. But another part, the part that had just discovered I came from somewhere real, wanted to believe. I lay back down on the couch, clutching the letter to my chest, and finally let exhaustion pull me under. I dreamed of Rebecca, of Joseph, of a life I'd never known but had always been waiting for me. When I woke, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the dirty windows. My phone said it was 9:30. I'd slept longer than I meant to. I could hear an engine outside and looked through the window to see Carl's pickup truck pulling up, along with another vehicle, an old Jeep driven by a woman about Carl's age. I met them on the porch. Carl was carrying bags of groceries, and the woman had a thermos and what looked like cleaning supplies. "Merry Christmas," Carl said. "This is my wife, Margaret. I told her about you, and she insisted on helping." Margaret smiled warmly. "No young man should spend Christmas alone in a cold house. I brought coffee, breakfast sandwiches, and enough cleaning supplies to make at least one room livable." I was overwhelmed by their kindness. "Thank you. Really, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Margaret replied. "Just help us carry this stuff inside. Then you can tell us what you found last night." Over coffee and surprisingly good breakfast sandwiches that Margaret had made that morning, I showed them Joseph's letter. They both read it carefully, Margaret wiping tears from her eyes. "That sounds like Joseph," Carl said quietly. "Proud man, hard on himself. I wish I'd known about you. We could have helped, could have told the courts he had support." "It's in the past," I said, though the words hurt. "But I need help understanding something. Joseph mentioned money, hidden where the morning sun touches the earth through metal wings. Does that mean anything to you?" Carl frowned, thinking. Margaret's eyes suddenly widened. "The old windmill," she said. "There used to be a windmill on the eastern edge of the property. Joseph's father built it in the 30s. The blades were made of metal, shaped like wings. It caught the morning sun every day." Carl nodded slowly. "That's right, I'd forgotten about that old thing. It broke down years ago, but the structure might still be standing." Hope surged through me. "Can we check?" "Finish your breakfast first," Margaret said firmly. "Then we'll go look." We trudged through the snow toward the eastern boundary of the property, following what Carl said used to be a path. The sun was fully up now, turning the snow-covered fields into a blinding white expanse. My boots were soaked through, and my jeans were frozen stiff, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was the possibility that Joseph's father hadn't been confused, that there really was something hidden out here. After about 20 minutes of walking, we crested a small hill, and there it was. The windmill rose from the snow like a skeletal sentinel, its metal frame rusted orange and brown, but still standing. The blades were long gone, leaving only the arms reaching out like the spokes of a wheel. But I could imagine what it must have looked like in its prime, those metal wings spinning in the wind, catching the morning light. "Where the morning sun touches the earth through metal wings," I whispered. We approached carefully. The base of the windmill was a concrete platform, cracked and broken in places, with weeds poking through. The support structure was a lattice of metal beams forming a tower about 30 feet tall. At the base was a small access door, rusted shut. Carl produced a crowbar from his truck, and after several minutes of effort, we managed to pry the door open. Inside was a narrow space, maybe 4 feet across, with a ladder leading up into the tower. But at ground level, set into the concrete floor, was a metal plate with a ring handle. My heart pounded as I knelt down and pulled. The plate was heavy and resisted at first, but with Carl's help, we lifted it up. Beneath was a cavity in the concrete, lined with what looked like tar paper to keep out moisture. And inside that cavity was a wooden crate. We carefully lifted it out. The crate was about 2 feet long and a foot wide, surprisingly heavy. The lid was nailed shut, but Carl's crowbar made quick work of it. We pried off the top, and all three of us stared in silence at what was inside. Mason jars. 6 of them, packed carefully in straw, and each jar was filled with rolled-up bills and what looked like gold coins. "Sweet mercy," Margaret breathed. With shaking hands, I unscrewed one of the jars and pulled out a roll of bills. They were old, 20s and 50s and hundreds from the 40s and 50s, wrapped in rubber bands that disintegrated at my touch. The gold coins were American eagles, probably worth far more now than when they'd been hidden. We counted everything right there in the snow, spreading it out carefully. In total, there was just over $47,000 in cash and 32 gold coins. Carl looked up the current gold price on his phone. At today's value, the coins alone were worth nearly $70,000, $117,000, hidden for probably 80 years, waiting to be found. "This is enough," I said, my voice cracking. "This is enough to pay off the back taxes, isn't it?" Carl was already calculating on his phone. "More than enough. Banks seized it for about $18,000 in unpaid taxes, plus penalties and fees. Even with legal costs, you'd have plenty left over." And I looked back at the farmhouse in the distance, at the sagging barn, at the snow-covered fields that belonged to my family. "I can get it back. I can get the farm back." Margaret squeezed my shoulder. "You can do more than that, honey. You can restore it. You can make it a home again." The next 3 days were a blur. Carl helped me contact a lawyer in Hartfield who specialized in property law. We brought the money to a bank, got it appraised and deposited, and started the legal process of paying off the debt and reclaiming the property. The bank was surprisingly cooperative once they realized they'd get their money and avoid the headache of trying to auction off rural land nobody wanted. Margaret organized volunteers from town, people who remembered Joseph and wanted to help his grandson. They came with cleaning supplies, tools and casseroles, because apparently that's what small-town people do. We cleaned the house from top to bottom, fixed broken windows, patched holes in the roof, and got the water and electricity turned back on. I found the workshop Joseph had mentioned in his letter, a small building behind the barn that I'd initially overlooked. Inside were boxes of family documents, photographs going back generations, letters between Joseph and Rebecca before their falling out, and a baby book Rebecca had started for me before she died. She'd written in it sporadically, little notes about my first smile, my first word, her hopes for my future. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before she died. "Lucas is so strong," she'd written. "Whatever happens, I know he'll be okay. I just wish I could be there to see the man he becomes." On New Year's Eve, exactly 1 week after I'd arrived in Willow Creek, the lawyer called. The property was officially mine. Meadowbrook Acres belonged to Lucas Brennan. I stood on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the fields. The house was warm now, the heater humming steadily. Margaret had helped me set up the small bedroom as my own, though I'd kept all of Rebecca's childhood things exactly as Joseph had left them. The living room had been cleaned and rearranged. It actually looked like a home. Carl and Margaret had invited me to their New Year's party in town, but I'd asked for one night alone here first. I needed to feel what it meant to be home, really home, for the first time in my life. I pulled out my phone and looked at the lock screen, the photograph of Rebecca holding me as a baby. "I made it," I whispered. "I found my way home." The farm would need work. The fields would need to be cleared and planted in the spring. The barn needed major repairs. I'd need to learn about farming, about running a business, about 100 things I knew nothing about. But I had time now. I had resources. And most importantly, I had a place where I belonged. I wasn't alone anymore. As midnight approached, I walked out into the snow and looked up at the stars, clearer and brighter than I'd ever seen them in the city. Somewhere up there, maybe Joseph and Rebecca were watching. Maybe they knew I'd found what they'd left for me, not just the farm or the money, but the truth about where I came from. I'd spent 19 years believing I was nobody from nowhere, but I was wrong. I was Lucas Brennan, grandson of Joseph, son of Rebecca, heir to 3 generations of people who'd worked this land and loved it. I came from somewhere. I came from people who'd tried their best, who'd made mistakes, but never stopped caring. And now I was home. The new year arrived quietly, marked only by the distant sound of fireworks from town. I made myself a promise standing there in the snow. I would restore Meadowbrook Acres. I would make it thrive again. I would honor the people who'd given it to me by building the life here that they'd wanted me to have. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in my life, I had a foundation to build on. I had a place that was mine, not because the state assigned it to me, or because I was passing through, but because it was in my blood, because 3 generations of my family had poured their lives into this soil. I walked back inside, closing the door against the cold. Tomorrow I'd start planning. Tomorrow I'd figure out next steps. But tonight I just wanted to sit in Joseph's chair by the fireplace and feel what it meant to be home. Thank you so much for staying with me through Lucas's journey. If this story touched something in you, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel. It means the world to us to know these stories resonate with people. I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed how you saw yourself? Have you ever gone searching for your roots and found more than you expected? Maybe you've experienced loss and found something beautiful in the aftermath. Share your story in the comments below. This community is built on real experiences and real connections, and your story matters. Someone out there needs to hear it. And tell me, what's the biggest lesson you're taking from Lucas's journey? For me, it's that being alone and being abandoned aren't always the same thing. Sometimes love shows up in ways we don't recognize until we're ready to see it. Sometimes the people who couldn't stay still found ways to make sure we'd be okay. Until next time, remember that wherever you are in your journey, you're not alone. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.